and our meeting tonight is now open for sharing testimonies of healing through Christian Science.
Dave from Florida. Go ahead, please.
Okay, hi. Thank you for those real timely readings, first of all. A couple of weeks ago, I noticed a red blotch on my leg. It was definitely not normal, and all sorts of thoughts came to me as to what it might be. I decided that I was not going to accept it, and every time I looked at it, I worked with a thought from Science and Health: truth removes properly whatever is offensive. I also worked with the thought that my Christ consciousness cannot be mesmerized by aggressive suggestions. That's a paraphrase from Bicknell Young's article on aggressive mental suggestion. Well, it wasn't long before the mark was entirely gone. I was very grateful. I'm grateful to be a member here for the healing practitioners, and I'm also grateful that Mrs. Eddy established these Wednesday evening services that allow us to share how we've been helped and healed by Christian Science. In these days and times, it is certainly important to share this healing power with the world. Thank you.
Thank you. Jeremy.
I am very grateful to be here tonight. As I learn Christian Science and learn I can trust God completely, I am understanding that He is my exclusive provider for everything. What I have been learning in this church and from my practitioner has been allowing me to more consistently not only look to Him for my needs, but also more readily receive them and be ready to do His work. It has been a wonderful experience to do this, especially since I was so confused and full of doubt before coming to Plainfield. We have been recording and broadcasting at the North Star during these past few weeks, and at first the incoming phone line from the teleconference was being distorted as we listened here. I found it very distressing, but I just couldn't figure it out on my own, so I left the need with God. Then I woke up last Wednesday with the answer, which ended up being a slight change in the configuration. The sound since then has been perfect. My practitioner told me not only is it better, it is solved, which made me feel really peaceful about it. And I know the only way that answer came was through God, and I'm so grateful for that. To be here, learning Christian Science, learning that not only is God real and good, but He actually is truth and love, and I can completely trust in Him, well, that is a constant blessing and joy. Very grateful to be here. Thank you.
Thank you.
Luann, New York.
Thank you. Over the past couple of months, I've been taking the time to put things into perspective. I've been working on the watches and going over the things I have learned here. The wonderful thing about Christian Science, as taught by this church, is that it continuously gives me something positive to focus my attention on, instead of the false claims that had been my downfall in years past. It has given me the courage to persevere. It has guided me through the dark night and lifted me up in the morning. It has taught me that nothing in my past matters and has no power over me and does not determine who I am today. What matters now is taking the truth into my heart and using this to move forward, expressing God good, fulfilling His purpose, and using what I have been given to help lift others. With gratitude for the help of my practitioner and all the healings I have had, I can awaken each morning, embracing the life I have now and being grateful to God for setting me free. By free, I mean that I don't have to accept any lie that would keep me from expressing God or experiencing the life God has created me to live. So instead of grumbling that nothing good ever happens, I can emphatically say that something great happens every day. And today something great happened. I went to the store to buy a light for a light box that I had built, to use for tracing pictures. As I was standing there looking at the lighting options and the prices, a guy from the appliance department asked if I needed help. Normally I would say no, then try to figure it all out by myself, but today I felt something different. I explained to him what I was doing, and he said, "I have a brand new light box at home that I am not using. I will go get it on my lunch break and bring it back." He gave me a great deal on the price. All I could do was smile and thank God. When I went back to pick it up, I brought him one of the mugs I made in my shop as a thank you for being so kind. He was so elated to have it and happily expressed that he wanted to come to my shop as soon as he could. I have learned that wonderful things will happen if you get yourself out of the way and let God shine through. I am so grateful to God for all that He is and for all the promises kept. I'm grateful for the strength and courage that my practitioner has shared with me over the years and all the lessons I have received through Christian Science. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Melissa, Connecticut. Go ahead, please.
Thank you so much for the wonderful readings. I am so grateful for all the members of the Plainfield Church and our practitioners. As my testimony this evening, I'd like to comment that we as a family are spending much more time together during this lockdown in a way that gives everyone the opportunity to see each other in a variety of situations. Each day, I have seen my teenage son start off with great goals for getting schoolwork and his athletic workouts completed. He wakes up happy and ready to go. He starts his schoolwork, pen in hand. But the pull of his phone to watch TikTok and play video games on his laptop call out. He tries hard to stay after his work, but he loses the battle, puts down the work, and turns his focus to electronics. Within a short time, he is unhappy and depressed that he's unable to get his schoolwork done. He changes from trying to do well at school to trying to just get his homework done, to then figuring out excuses for it being late, all while glued to his phone's little screen and the action of his video game. Yesterday morning, I was reading What is Mind in Science and Health. I was drawn to thinking about my son in a way that tied the statements in Science and Health together with the writings my practitioner had had me read 2 weeks ago in Business by Martha Wilcox. The business of a teenager includes the activity of schoolwork, as I interpreted the business article. And our activity is always guided by the law of principle. Principle, being mind, is infinite. So the law of principle is always in effect and can be the only thing in effect, even with schoolwork. Then, in What is Mind, Mrs. Eddy says, quote, "The children of God have but one mind. How can good lapse into evil when God, the mind of man, never sins?" I prayed to know that as my son did his schoolwork, he could never lapse away from his business activity as guided by the law of principle. A lapse would imply that the mesmeric pull of electronic entertainment had the ability to defeat the law of principle. Since, quote, "we can have but one mind if that one is infinite," there can be no such mesmeric pull. The pull is only the suppositional opposite of infinite mind, and therefore is completely and utterly unreal and powerless. Thoughts came to me about God's creation in Genesis 1. I thought of our Father, Mother, God putting creation on hold for a few minutes just so he could watch some TikTok videos. I laughed out loud on that false image. I'm happy to report that my son was able to get through most of his work yesterday, in a big improvement of the prior day. I do know that the mesmerism of phones and laptops and video games is strong, and I know that I have to pray about this daily to guard us. I am praying to know that the mesmeric pull has no reality and therefore no power to change the law of principle. My son and all God's children have the freedom to go about their business activity with the guidance of principle. This is the true picture and the only picture. The lie will die out from starvation. Feed the truth and starve the error. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Karen from California. Go ahead, please.
Good evening. A year ago, my husband and I were preparing to move out of my house that I had lived in for 35 years. For years, I was certain I was never going to move. I loved my house and the neighborhood. And yet, here we were, moving out of this house and into our new home. It had become clear that this house was not going to meet the needs of my husband and I. So we began the process of finding a realtor to help us sell my house and find another. I called my practitioner to help me with the sadness I was beginning to feel of moving from the house I loved, but also in opening my thought to what God was preparing for us. It had to be good because it was God's plan that was unfolding. A favorite passage of mine from Divinity Course in General Collectania, Mrs. Eddy says, quote, God's plans are going on as best for you and me, whether we know it or not. But in the knowing of that fact, there is rest and peace. Reliance on God's plan overcomes obstacles and removes obstructions, unquote. Our realtor, when we first met, said that sellers today most often move out, put everything in storage, repaint, and have a company come in and stage their homes for selling. When I heard that, the first thought that came to my mind was no. I did not say it out loud, but I did not want to do that, and prayed to know that whatever it was that we were led to do, it was because it was God's plan, not ours. It did come to me, however, that we were not going to have to do that, but nevertheless, not my will, but thine be done. When it was time for the realtor to come over and begin the process of putting our house on the market, almost the first words out of her mouth were, I think I have a buyer for your house. There was a widow living alone across the street from us, whose daughter and son-in-law lived only a couple of blocks away. They had been looking into how to stay in the neighborhood, but all lived together. When our realtor told them our house was coming onto the market, they realized it was the perfect answer they had been looking for. They offered exactly what we were asking. We opened a 30-day escrow, but now my husband and I needed to find our home. Within 2 weeks, we found the perfect home for us, and the sellers agreed to a 2-week escrow in order that both escrows could close within a day or two of each other. All of us were in agreement that we would all like a month before having to move after escrow closed. Every detail of this experience was so harmonious. Now, the actual job of preparing to move seemed to be such a monumental one, since I had lived in my house for so long. I knew the only way I was going to be able to do this was to know that God was going to show me how to proceed. And as I put all the responsibility on Him to do that, I was able to accomplish so much more each day than I expected. Another quote that helped me to get my peace and turn everything over to God was a quote from Bicknell Young, which says, "A divine idea carries within itself the power to accomplish the divine purpose, and the responsibility of its unfoldment belongs to divine principle, who cares for each detail of its progressive being." Unquote. There has not been a moment of sadness for having left my former home. My husband and I are so grateful that our new house has proven to be the perfect home for us. As it turned out, my daughter needed a place to stay during the current shutdown, and our new home has provided the perfect place for her during this time. I am so grateful for all that I have learned since coming to Plainfield Church about who I am as God's expression and how to live that scientific knowing in my everyday life.
Thank you.
Shahida, Maryland. Go ahead, please.
Good evening. After reading the article Speeding the Victory by Ian George Watt, recently featured on the Plainfield website, one particular line in the article caught my eye. It goes, quote, "We must listen and know definitively and forcefully each day that God good is everywhere, and that he governs and controls our thinking, and that no other control can exist or operate," end quote. Some years ago, shortly after I found this church, I lived in Baltimore, Maryland, was recently laid off from my job and was struggling to make ends meet. I had already moved to a more affordable apartment, but still struggled to pay my rent on time. Each month was a balancing act, trying to cobble together the rent from a limited part-time income and filling in the gaps with credit card cash advances. Several times I returned to the apartment complex after a day of job searching to find another residence belongings on the sidewalk. After I received a few eviction notices myself for late payment of rent, I started to really fear that one day I'd come home to find my own belongings on the sidewalk. To compound my difficulties during this time, I was dealing with a very stressful physical mobility issue. Knew very few people in the area, and was just drowning in the credit card debt that I had been relying on for some daily expenses. The absolute last thing I needed at that time was to find myself suddenly homeless to boot. I was actively looking for new employment and felt hopeful for the future, but the process was just taking a very long time. My mother had suggested that I move back to the D.C. area and live with family while I reestablished my financial footing. And while that offer made a lot of sense, it seemed too much like failure to me, and my pride kept finding reasons why that just wouldn't work. I made pros and cons lists to no avail. And one day I started to sit down to pray for direction using Psalm 23 and striving to know that the Lord is my shepherd and will direct me to where I needed to be. And when I took this issue of my living situation to God, the thought came to me very clearly that God's goodness was everywhere and I could never be deprived of goodness regardless of where I was. So I humbly made the move back home, and after 6 months, just over 6 months later, I was gainfully employed, and soon after I was able to move into a place of my own. Later, when the apartment complex came around to bill me for the last few months on my lease, I was able to quickly pay that off, as well as all the accumulated credit card debt. I have found that man's extremity is indeed God's opportunity, but only if I'm willing to put self aside and be obedient to God's direction. I am grateful to have Christian Science in my life and to be learning more about God's never-ending goodness here at the Plainfield Christian Science Church Independent. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Joanne, Florida. Go ahead, please.
Those readings were fantastic. Thank you. The other evening, I had a bad pain in my stomach, almost like someone was constantly punching me there. I decided to just sit quietly and read some of our Christian Science literature, specifically an address by Bicknell Young. In it, Bicknell Young writes, quote, "Let us more and more have confidence in the power of God. Let us trust God more and more in all our ways," end quote. As I sat reading for about an hour and thought about the truth I was reading, I felt such a sense of peace and God's presence come over me, as if I was having a visit with God, and I forgot all about my stomach pain. When I finished reading, the pain was completely gone, and I felt well and refreshed. I am so grateful for this pure Christian Science that Mrs. Eddy has given us, that heals anything and teaches us how much God loves us and has only good for us. I'm grateful for the healing help that I've always received from practitioner here, and I'm especially grateful to be here tonight. Thank you.
Thank you.
Nancy, New Jersey. Go ahead, please.
Good evening. Thank you for the very beautiful and powerful readings tonight. Tonight, I just simply wanted to express my deep and heartfelt gratitude for the Plainfield Christian Science Church. During this time of testing and isolation that we've been going through, I find myself feeling more and more blessed and thankful to God every day for the tremendous gift and source of strength and protection that this church, my practitioner, and the fellowship with the members of this church, who I like to lovingly refer to as my church family, have been to me. This church has been a rock, it's been my protection, and it has given me a purpose by teaching me how to pray and watch more effectively for our nation, my fellow man, and the world. In miscellaneous writings on page 262, Mrs. Eddy writes in a short article titled Heart to Heart, quote, "When the heart speaks, however simple the word, its language is always acceptable to those who have hearts." End quote. She goes on to thank her students for the good that they're doing, and she writes, and this is very loosely paraphrased, "Thank you, dear students, for working conscientiously and assiduously, giving relief to the sick, joy to the suffering, hope to the disconsolate, lifting the fallen, strengthening the weak, and encouraging the heart grown faint." As I read this, it felt as if she was describing the Plainfield Church. For to me, this is what is being demonstrated and taught here in this church every single day. She goes on to mention two words found in the scriptures that she writes, quote, "suggest the sweetest similes to be found in any language," unquote, and they are rock and feathers. "Upon this rock I build my church, and he shall cover thee with his feathers." This spoke to me of Plainfield Church, whose foundation is built on God, where Christ's Christianity and Mrs. Eddy's pure Christian Science is taught, and how Plainfield and the teaching here is a source of strength and a sure protection. A church where the instructive teachings, the love and support of our practitioners, and the fellowship and work and watching of its members is to me the ultimate example of heart speaking to heart. I am so grateful to God for his ever-presence and guiding light in all that is accomplished here, and is drawing more and more people to this church from all over the world at a time when it is being so freely given and taught here in Plainfield is so greatly needed. I'm so grateful for all of this and for the opportunities given to us here to contribute and to be a part of the great work being done here that is reaching out and blessing everyone everywhere. Thank you for everything, and I'm so grateful to be here this evening.
Thank you.
Day, Georgia. Go ahead, please.
Thank you. Learning the importance of thanking God sincerely and continually through my study of Christian Science has been one of the most valuable lessons for me. Understanding that there's nothing too small to express gratitude for helps me to be consistent in this practice. And I'm realizing that the more I give thanks for, the more that I have to give thanks for, both the blessings that I receive and those that I'm able to share. More importantly, I now know that there's never a time when there is nothing to be thankful for, and I can't be tricked by any aggressive suggestion that says otherwise. I'm grateful for what I'm learning in this church and for all that I have yet to learn. Thank you, Gary, for tonight's readings. I'm very grateful to be a part of this meeting tonight.
Thank you. Linda.
Thank you very much for the readings tonight. Tonight I want to express my gratitude for the genuine healing work being done and taught at the Plainfield Christian Science Independent Church. I was reminded the other day of a healing I had of reoccurring congestion that I had suffered for many, many years. It came quietly after regular Plainfield practitioner support. After years of trying many different remedies, this was a beautiful example for me of how effective Christian Science is. It was not a quick healing, but it came about from many lessons, including the missing element of moral transformation from my previous training in Christian Science. Through the prayers, patience, and instruction of my Plainfield practitioner, I have been undoing thoughts that have kept me in bondage to negative habits and experiences, which is helping me bring my life in line with God. I'm very grateful for this little church and its healing example, Christ Jesus and his teaching, and Mrs. Eddy and the sacrifices she gave so that we could have this science. Thank you.
Thank you.
Florence, Georgia. Go ahead, please.
Thank you. I have two testimonies tonight. The first one is from Germany. It says, at the end of February, a coworker passed on. It was a shock, but I immediately started to look for articles and sentences about life on Plainfield's website and searched for active verbs and synonyms describing life, activity, movement from online dictionaries and wrote them down. I felt that my grief was not as overwhelming as other past times when someone close to me had passed on. On the Monday, I could feel the silence and heaviness of grief when I entered my office. I had to be careful not to participate in the mood in the office. Twice I forgot to take the right stand and suddenly tears ran over my face. And I realized how important it is to defend what I had read, especially when everybody around believes the opposite. A big picture of our colleague was on a desk near the entrance to my office. This was a challenge. Our team decided to go to the funeral, and my practitioner reminded me to pray and to use the truth about life that I know and to be of help to those who would be mourning there. I did so, and at times the whole experience felt as though I was watching a strange movie. After the funeral, I stopped at my co-worker's photo and declared to myself that just because my eyes do not see him and my ears cannot hear him, he is still alive. I know it, and that is the truth. Doing that cleared my thought, and I had a glimpse that life is around me and he's everywhere in it. Now I am able to look at the photograph and smile at him and be grateful for such a nice coworker. 4 weeks later, my father passed on in Italy. His wife rang me up in the afternoon and asked me to pray a few hours before he passed on. I did, and prayed with Psalm 91 and its spiritual meaning, and read an article from Herbert E. Rickey that helped me. Here are some of what Mr. Rickey said. Right where you are, divine life is giving birth to its beautiful and inspiring manifestation. Life is conceiving of a living creature. Where do you come in? That's right. You are the living creature, the very manifestation of spiritual eternal life. Also, he said, do you think you'll ever die? Inconceivable. It is impossible for us to mentally picture the absence of life. It is impossible for us to associate ourselves with anything but eternal life. We cannot conceive of the time when we might not be here. We cannot conceive of anything except life abundant and life eternal. I also worked with Mrs. Singletary reference to hymn 23, and I prayed also very earnestly with that hymn. In the middle of the night, I suddenly felt an overwhelming feeling of very intense happiness, really heavenly felicity. It was so beautiful. The thought came that my father had passed on and I could share his happiness. Immediately the negative thought came, how can you be happy when your father died? And I knew that mortal mind thinking wanted to destroy this wonderful experience, but I did not listen to it. These two experiences about life has helped me a lot. It is the first time of not falling into heavy grief and suffering. I am very grateful for Christian Science. Thank you also for your beautiful church work. And the second one is from New York City. And she says, this testimony is long overdue. Back in March, I was supposed to move to another apartment, and also the company I work for was undergoing major changes. I was fearful, apprehensive, and for a while forgot who my maker and my husband is, Isaiah, and foolishly allowed myself to think the worst outcome, or at least to accept mediocre results. My practitioner helped me to turn my thought to the correct way. She also helped me to see that God has always been there for me all my life, not just sporadically or capriciously, but at all times. It took me a while to accept this truth, but now looking back, I can see that indeed God was always there to hold me and guide me and to obtain results that were indeed better than I thought. For one, I was able to get an apartment in one day. The first apartment I was shown was perfect, and the process to apply, check credit, and so forth went incredibly smooth. I also was able to arrange for movers and junk removals for the same day without any conflict. I moved to my new apartment on a Friday, and right after, the New York on pause order became effective the next day, mandating everyone to work from home. This allowed me to complete unpacking and organizing my new living space, as well as setting up internet and other needed services. Everything went along very harmoniously, and it was obviously the result of God's plan, which is only good for all His children. The best is that when my present company was merged with this other mega national company, our jobs were not guaranteed or promised. However, this is what is so outstanding. Due to the pandemic and the work situation, they had no choice but to keep everyone in their current positions, even those that worked out of New York State and which were slotted to be transitioned. It sounds a bit bizarre to say this, but it showed me very clearly that God can make a way where there is no way. I am not implying that the pandemic was good. What I am saying is that God's ways are not our ways, as stated in the Bible, and He can produce good things for His children even out of seeming chaos. This has been for me a learning experience that has given me a little understanding of what the phrase God is a present help means. During these seeming difficult times, it may seem hard to trust Him or to see any goodness, but in my case, this demonstration of His love and care has done much good for my learning and understanding. I am very grateful for this teaching, for Mary Baker Eddy, and for being a part of this church. Gary, thank you very much for your readings tonight. It's for all times, and I'm very happy to be here, grateful for all the testimonies. Thank you, Mrs. Eddy, for making the Bible's message so clear.
Thank you. Mary.
Good evening, everyone. I have a testimony tonight from England. I'd also like to express my gratitude for the lesson and watching point this week about learning from our experiences. This goes hand in hand with the start of the last roundtable session, in which both Jeremy and Gary's comments were very helpful. Growing up in the organization, I found it confusing and stressful to try to be always perfect humanly. which led to feeling guilty if a problem or illness arose. I can't be grateful enough that the Plainfield presents a much kinder position as originally intended by Mrs. Eddy, that we all benefit from experiences which come to us to make us grow. I am hugely grateful for the support of my practitioner, the example of Mrs. Eddy in Christ Jesus, and for all that Plainfield provides, and therefore for all the work which supports this outreach. Much love and gratitude to you all. And then from our church website bulletin board, Florida. I just finished reading the most recent issue of our newsletter and want to thank Jim Dybel for its purity and sweetness. Also, thank you for directing us to Hillsdale College to obtain a copy of our nation's Constitution. What a great habit you shared with us. You're reading and studying the Constitution on the 4 national holidays. Thank you, Jim. And I would just like to add that Jim is a World War II veteran. He's a national treasure. And it's the reason, one of the many reasons for his deep patriotism and love for our country. He saw things firsthand, unspeakable things, and he knew the great selflessness and the giving of life to give us this freedom that we enjoy today. And Jim has been with us a long time, and we are so very, very grateful for him. And when there was a need for someone to step up and oversee the newsletter, he absolutely was ready and willing and able to do it. And we are so grateful for all that he's done in contributing to this church and to contributing to our nation and to our world. Thank you very much for those very powerful readings tonight. I thought how important that Mrs. Eddy has had animal magnetism as a topic for a lesson twice a year, and how important it is to remember that we must always be defending ourselves from animal magnetism and hypnotism. It was read tonight from Message from 1901. People may listen complacently to the suggestion of the inaudible falsehood, not knowing what is hurting them or that they are hurt. This mental bane could not bewilder, darken, or misguide consciousness physically, morally, or spiritually if the individual knew what was at work and his power over it. This almost makes me weep to think of what Mrs. Eddy has given us, because this is what's going on now. And as Christian scientists, we know what's trying to work. We know that what I call the nameless nothing is a mesmerism, and we know how to handle that and dispel it. But you see, so many don't. And so we are working and watching and praying to know that they do know. They have the mind of Christ, and they will awaken, and that Christian Science will be known and appreciated for the final revelation, and also for Mrs. Eddy's place in giving it to us. Also, in the first edition on page 107, Mrs. Eddy says, "In an age of sin and sensuality hastening to greater development of power, 'tis fearful to consider the influence of belief, without more honesty and understanding to steer clear of the fearful shoals on this dangerous and unexplored coast. The peril of Salem witchcraft even is not past until that era is met by the understanding and destroyed. Not the gallows, but explanation destroys the era. To this end, metaphysics are important. Study mind more and matter less, for we must find refuge in soul to escape the era of the latter days. And mediumship, mesmerism, more than all else, contribute to a terrible future development of discord. We should strongly insist on the majesty of truth and its control over error, and begin today denying right or reality to aught but God and the true idea, saying, "Depart from me, all ye that work iniquity," and thus break up the reign of error